what I think is a real obstacle to our finding our own authenticity is this inability or lack of conditioning about how to encounter and stay in the awkward, stumbly, fumbly middle. How do we build the tolerance to stay there if authenticity is the goal?
Hey, Nicole, what do you get when a former corporate CEO and a do-gooding executive walk into a recording studio?
Well, Erin, nothing, because the two of us are usually on my couch or Zoom, because wine.
You get a podcast created for Gen X women who are bought into the corporate world, but fed up with the BS.
I know. It's how to thrive the 9 to 5 or 6 or 7.
It's career therapy. It's comedy. It's definitely full-on authenticity. Basically, we give you tangible strategies to rise in your career without compromising everything else.
Because work doesn't have to suck.
Oh, hey, are we recording? This is Erin. Hey, that was awkward. You ever had that feeling? Have you ever been in a meeting or an interview or maybe even just at a party and you're just like, why am I so freaking awkward? Well, I have good news for you because today we're going to talk about how awkwardness can actually be a secret weapon for impossible change. I had a talk with Henna Pryor, who is a former executive recruiter. So it's great perspective there. But now she's a certified coach. She's a workplace performance expert. She's a 2 times TEDx speaker, global keynote speaker, executive facilitator, and just super cool chick. Somebody that epitomizes everything that because work doesn't have to suck and her authenticity ventures are all about. Now, that was kind of awkward. Authenticity ventures, whatever. She will share stories that inspire from both herself and clients she's had. She shares some great data and will just have you thinking about the cringe, the awkwardness in a totally different way. So without further awkwardness, here's Henna Pryor.
Hello.
Hey.
How are you?
Good. How are you, Helen?
Good. Henna. Oh, Helen. Oh, I get it.
I'm such a dick.
I'm totally
You totally hammered me. Oh, I love it. I love that you just did that.
But you corrected me.
I love it. And I did. And it's so funny. My other TEDx just came out yesterday, my second one. So I'm sort of in the swirl and frenzy of that one, that the Helen thing, like on any other day, I would have immediately got that. And today I was like, huh? Oh, she's talking about.
Yeah, to let our listeners in, because we just go right into this because it's awkward.
Of course.
If we don't.
Exactly.
So maybe you can tell them the story about Helen.
Oh, yes. So at the beginning of my first TEDx, which is about awkwardness, why awkwardness is your secret weapon for risk-taking at work, I tell a story about how I worked for this partner who repeatedly called me Helen, and my name is Henna, but I couldn't correct him because I was new on the job and I felt awkward about it. So I sat there and let him call me Helen for way too long. So yeah, I get a bit of that every now and then. People messaging me on LinkedIn, "Hi Helen, hey Helen." I'm like, yeah, real funny guys. So, but I'm better now about correcting. So
I love it. I'm so excited that we're getting to talk. My first question is: Was there a moment, right, when you sort of awoke and thought, "Oh my gosh, my awkward is actually this secret weapon"? Was there a story or a time?
Yeah. A moment where I discovered that, I would say not a singular moment. It was a series of a million moments. But I think what I realized one day was that the people that I looked up to most, so, we're all driven by society's conditioning of what we think cool looks like or what we think confident looks like. And what I knew definitively for sure was I couldn't seem to reach that. That was never coming for me. She was not going to ever get there. This sort of flawless, I constantly have a bruise on my leg and my husband is like, why? And I'm like, because I constantly run into the corner of the desk, even though it's been there for 20 years, right? It's just that grace, that effortlessness, that flawlessness just never seemed like it was happening. And I just started to notice that the people I looked up to the most really were the ones who embraced this feeling that I spent my entire formative and professional life trying to hide, which was how insanely awkward I felt about everything, about every room I was in, about every conversation I was having. And so I just got very curious about that specific emotion. So not just discomfort. This isn't about just getting comfortable, being uncomfortable, not just about my stretching my growth zone or my comfort zone, not even just about approval, but that particular emotion and how much we hate feeling it and how amazing it is when we actually allow it in and embrace it and study it and understand it. And so it kind of sent me on this deep dive about, I want to understand this emotion. I want to talk about it more and see what's there.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I'm guessing it wasn't just informed. I know you're also an executive recruiter, which,
Yeah.
I know when we've had a few other executive recruiters on the podcast over the years. We all want to know what you're thinking, right? Or
Yeah.
your past executive recruiter mind is thinking. And I know you mentioned that you saw people, you would tell them you're not necessarily repelling anyone, but you're also not compelling anyone, which I thought was like, so how did you see this, manifest itself from that lens?
Yeah, I think what I observed a lot in 14 years of staffing and recruitment, and honestly continue to observe now doing leadership development and sales coaching and training and all these other things, is we have this deep-rooted conditioning that we need to, in order to be successful, to perform a bit, to play this certain role, because that's what we watched our mentors do, or that's what we watched the top performers do. And to a degree, it works, right? In early career, especially when we're trying to achieve XYZ and we look to the most successful person in our office or the leader that we think has it together, and we try to embody whatever it is they do, it does help a little bit. And then everyone, it feels like, and I don't like to speak in absolutes, but it seems like everyone reaches their point where living that way becomes so exhausting that it is no longer sustainable. It is no longer tenable. And more importantly, the growth that they're looking for starts to plateau. It starts to stall out. And it's because catering to others' expectations, and I talk about this research in the book, there's new research on catering and how physically exhausting it is. How you literally collapse into bed at the end of the night, trying to be a version that you're observing rather than understanding how to be a version that suits you. So I love that you talk about authenticity. What I hope to bring to the conversation is, we hear a lot about authenticity. What I think is a real obstacle to our finding our own authenticity is this inability or lack of conditioning about how to encounter and stay in the awkward, stumbly, fumbly middle. How do we build the tolerance to stay there if authenticity is the goal?
I love that. I love that so much. And what I usually tell people is, it is going to be awkward at first when you start to say, I'm going to use authenticity as my secret weapon. It's kind of how I talk about it, right?
Yeah.
And there is that very sort of awkward period where people might question you, and how do you get over sort of that rainbow bridge? So I know you said you don't do a lot of one-on-one coaching, but I know you've done a lot of work with leaders of all levels, executives, emerging leaders. What are some of the things? And obviously with coaching, it's very ad hoc and it's not prescribed, right? But what are some things that, or maybe stories you have of something that they've embraced through your coaching that's tangible, and help them, quote unquote, win?
Yeah, I've got so many great stories. So just to clarify, I do still do one-on-one coaching. I just have less capacity for it than I used to, because I do a lot more speaking now. I'll actually share, and she's given me permission to share this story publicly. I'll share a recent story. My very dear friend, Melissa Jordan, she works high up in marketing, and she had an opportunity to apply for this new job that was a stretch, the way she describes it. She said, this is a VP role. This is a big role. I didn't really feel remotely qualified for it, but I decided to shoot my shot anyway, right? So she applies to this role. She gets in there for the interview, and she said, Henna, you had just posted something about, embracing my awkward. And all I could think is, there are people interviewing for this position that have way more skills than I do, like technical skills, but I need them to know that they will not have anyone who will outthink creative new approaches or be willing to try something new in service of taking the company further. So she brought the most ridiculous photo she could find of her from her childhood. And Melissa's this gorgeous human, but previously had like a terrible mullet and like very, very pronounced front teeth, right? And so not the image of grace or elegance or confidence that one would imagine now. And so she kind of showed this story of what young Melissa, would have done in XYZ situation. She really like embraced all of that previous awkwardness, the way it shows up for her now in her leadership. They loved how insanely relatable she was. They loved how she was able to laugh at herself. They loved that she took this thing that others would have found embarrassing and made it part of her leadership story. And she got the job. And she's like, Henna, they told me the reason I got the job was because I was willing to be this fully formed, like imperfect, stumbly, fumbly. Like I literally made that a showcase, a hallmark of why I thought I would be a good fit for the position. And they're like, this is what we need. This is what we need so badly. We've got a team of people that are not 100% confident in their skills. They need this embodied in their leader. And she's like, I don't think I would have done that if it wasn't for just this idea of being able to embrace this side. So it's so many, there's so many ways it manifests, but I love hearing the stories of when people take this thing they've tucked away and made it their asset, made it their selling point.
I love that. It reminds me of the Sally Hogshead quote. I don't know if you know, different is better than better.
Yes,
right.
yes.
I mean, especially in that case, I think for so many of our listeners, right. If you're going in and objectively less qualified than everybody else, then the only way you're going to win is to be different. Even if it's not effective. It's your other strategy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's your only shot really in those cases.
Yeah. That's why I love what you said about you're not repelling.
Yeah.
But you're also not compelling anyone. I want to say that again, because so many people spend so much time in the making sure they don't repel and then forget to go, how am I compelling?
Yeah. And I know I've listened to some of your stuff. I've heard you talk about it. It's that approval brain, right? We're social creatures. We want that belonging. And it's, the thing about awkwardness specifically that I think is interesting as I dove into the research, awkwardness exists at a very interesting gap space. It's when the person we believe ourselves to be, our true selves, for a moment, all of a sudden is at odds, or there's a gap between that person and the person that they see on display. Right? That's when we feel awkward. So generally speaking, if I go trip over my own 2 feet on the way to the kitchen in a few minutes, which I very well might do, but nobody's here except for my dog, do I still feel awkward? Most people would answer no, because nobody's here. So awkwardness is very other focused in that way. It's subjective and it requires an other. So those are, the moments where we start to have to get used to that feeling. And then there's kind of 2 ways we do it. There's life's unplanned moments. Oops, I tripped over my own 2 feet in front of people. I didn't expect that. And then there's the awkwardness we feel when we're trying something, when we're taking a risk and it didn't quite land the way we hoped, or we spoke up and it went over, like a bag of farts, like it didn't work, right? Or nobody responded, or there was silence. And so to me, it's like learning to navigate both of those tensions, the unplanned awkwardness and the times where risk taking is inevitably inviting it in. It comes with the territory. How do we condition ourselves to be ready for it wherever it comes?
I love that. There was another thing that I heard you say, maybe it was in the TED Talk, I can't remember what, but that really stopped me. I really related with. You used a metaphor of we know health coaches know that in particular exercise, if we get too routine with exercise, which is something I had a health coach teach me many years ago. It sounds silly, but I was like, she's like, if you run the same route every single day, you're not going to get nearly as much effect as if you even run it the opposite way. Yep. And so talk a little bit about that metaphor and how you use that to condition people to embrace this awkwardness of them.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, in the fitness world, routines have so much benefit. So it's not to knock routines. There's so much benefit. But when we do the same exercises in the same order, our muscles, our body get used to it and we plateau. So that's, in my talks, I do this little arc, this graph. I call it the arc of awkwardness, but it's no different than a fitness arc in that our gains are not linear. They're logarithmic, which means, we kind of have all these big early gains. We first start exercising. We're like, feel great. I'm getting stronger. I feel more toned. And then all of a sudden we hit that plateau that we all seem to meet at our intermediate level of success. And we're like, I'm still doing the same stuff. How come nothing is changing, right? How come I feel the same? Nothing feels like it's improving because we hit that little plateau moment. Mental muscle is the exact same way, right? When we're trying something new, when we're taking new micro risks, yes, at first, those gains are easy. When we're early career, those gains feel easy. We're learning, we're growing. Yeah, we're making some mistakes along the way, but largely we're learning mistakes are okay. It feels fun. And then we get further along in our career and the stakes feel higher and it feels like more people are watching us. And suddenly when we need to keep going, I refer to it as the cringe chasm. We can't just keep doing it how we've been doing it. We got to adjust. We got to put a little bit of a course correction, a reversal, some muscle into it, because what we've done until that point, our mental muscle has been conditioned for that. But when we want to keep going, we need to call on some new muscles. We need to get some new strategies in place. And so much like any other mental fitness or conditioning, I refer to awkward tolerance as something that needs to be built. So the same way we might get better at, speaking up in a certain meeting, that's something that we practice. Speaking up when you feel awkward, or continuing to move forward when you feel awkward, or putting yourself in a position where awkwardness is nearly guaranteed, that is a specific mental muscle to build. And so same as before, if you haven't ever worked on it, conditioned it, you're not going to know what to do with it if it's only been done one way.
Yeah. And going back to the gap piece.
Yeah.
I think it's such an interesting way to look at it. And when people start to not just embrace that awkwardness, but actually wear it on their sleeves, like the story you told us about the woman bringing in the picture, what does that do for the gap? Does it close it? I mean, it sounds like a silly, academic question, but
no, it is.
Let's geek out on the gap for a minute.
I'm a super geek out person, so I love this. My take is that the gap never closes. And the reason the gap never closes is because awkwardness will never disappear. It is not a condition that will ever disappear. Even the most confident people we know who seem to be wildly unaffected by awkwardness, they aren't. They are still affected by it. Their comeback rate is just faster. Because as humans who are wired for social belonging, as humans who have predictive engine brains, who are trying to make sense of what's going to happen next, right? Our brains are looking for things. We create expectations. Awkwardness is going to exist anytime our expectations aren't met, right? Something else happened instead. And now we feel awkward about it, right? We thought it was going to be this. Now it was this. Unless we can predict a world with 100% certainty, we can't eliminate it. So in that sense, the gap never disappears. What we end up doing instead is getting stronger so that jumping the gap feels a lot easier. And we do it a lot faster. So, that comeback rate, sometimes, jumping the gap, even if I did it, I had a, awkwardness hangover for 2 days afterwards. I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, technically I made it to the other side. That was mortifying. I was embarrassed. Oh my God, I feel like I never want to do that again. You do it more and more often, then it becomes something where not only is it easier to jump, the comeback rate from the feelings, the discomfort are a lot faster. I still feel awkward. I just don't linger in it as long as I used to.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of you, I want to go back to you. I want to sit in you. That sounded really weird for a little bit. I want to go back to the stories because you had admittedly, right, a wildly successful career as an executive recruiter, top person every year. You were the rising star. You had risen. In that phase of life, was there a story when you sort of embraced your awkward to be your secret weapon?
Yeah, always. I mean, honestly, I think that was my whole career. I remember early on in my staffing and recruitment career, I learned from some wonderful managers, but I remember they would try to teach me to do the business their way. And it never resonated for me. I was just kind of like, I can't say these things. I can't do these things. It's just not who I am. And so very early on, I decided that my approach to sales, right, if we want to consider it that way, was to be almost like unbelievably over-indexed on the human side of things, which is, when something went well, obviously I would celebrate that. Or when something didn't go well, I would say things to a client, to professional, C-suite clients like, well, we are taking a ride on the Hot Mess Express, right? Because this is ridiculous. This person didn't show up. I'm mortified, right? It was just really very much owning all the missteps, all the mistakes. I think that bit was something that in that period of time, in those 10 years, for a while there, we were not taught to do. It was, in sales, in staffing, in these professional services roles, you need to be the expert. You need to understand the role. You are not meant to be this fully formed human who makes mistakes and gets it wrong and messes up. And so very early on, before I think the narrative for authenticity ticked up, I would do that. And then people would say, you have so much repeat business, Henna. You have so many referrals, Henna. And like, how is that? And I don't know that at the time I really recognized that that fully formed human experience made people drawn to me, that honesty, that, hey, this sucked and I really screwed the pooch.
Mm-hmm.
That really was the thing that kept them coming back. And, at the time I would have probably told you it was something else, but I can say with certainty now, especially with all the new research around authenticity, around embracing, our fully formed selves, that combination of hard work, expertise, and likability, when you embrace your awkwardness, people like you more for it. The research is there because your lack of perfection puts them at ease.
Right.
It helps them feel that they can trust you. And so over and over, I had deals go sideways. Over and over, I had things that I messed up on. And the ability to just, eat, cringe, right? That's terrible. Put my foot in my mouth. That I think really was a big catalyst for my success, even though I don't think I recognized it at the time.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the research we did last year on the impact of authenticity in the workplace, there were a number of things, but it's the trust, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and we expected it, but we didn't expect the correlation to be quite as profound as it was. And what we found, we looked at, companies with authentic cultures, they were 400% more likely to say there's a high level of trust in the organization because, what your clients were probably doing was, oh, if she's willing to say, I screwed the pooch on this whole thing. Like she's not hiding anything else because she didn't even have to tell me about some of these mistakes. And so their trust probably skyrockets. How about candidates? Is there a candidate story there, one in particular you can remember that, embraced their awkwardness and had great success when you were doing that role?
I think that the easiest way to think about, embracing candidate or embracing awkwardness in like an interview setting or something is, here's a truth to anchor into. The avoidance of awkward increases awkward. The avoidance of awkward increases awkward. So if, I've had many times where a candidate was asked, let's say a technical question in an interview, and they had no idea of the answer. There's one group of people that would try to BS their way through it or pretend like they knew. And the client, the hiring manager, of course, could sniff that out from a mile away. And then there's the second bucket of candidate who was, spoiler, the successful candidate who would say, this is embarrassing because I feel like I should know this and I just don't. I have no idea. It feels very awkward to say it out loud, but here's what I will tell you. If this was me and if I was your employee, here's what I would do to bridge that gap. Here's what I would do, right? So it's just naming this, oh gosh, I feel this because I feel like I should know this. But the fact that they were able to name it rather than, kind of stay in that awkward middle place, it helps diffuse it. The avoidance of it increases it. The acceptance of it helps people move through it faster. And so that was something I would start to prep candidates on is, hey, if you don't know something, own that awkward right then and there. Don't fidget. Don't get nervous. Don't get mortified. Don't get embarrassed. Don't even cringe. You don't need to. If you want to internally, of course, do, but then own it right out of the gate. Embrace the fact that this feels a little uncomfortable for you. And, 10 times out of 10, that would not only help them move through it quicker, but people would say, I really appreciated that they, did that and sat in that. So over and over, I would see that play out.
Yeah. Let me give you a scenario that's a little bit weightier. A lot of our listeners are executives already, right? Because I came from that world and I have good friends that actually come and listen sometimes.
Yeah.
And what they might be thinking is that's great. I mean, certainly feels heavy in a interview session, interview situation, but that's still one-on-one. What about a lot of my executives that are sort of thinking, yeah, but I'm surrounded by fairly inauthentic, rigid, worried about their job, other executives. And so a lot of times, whether it's a board meeting or a town hall or a quarterly business review, right? And so it gets much harder when you're sitting next to a bunch of people not doing it versus one-on-one where you're going in and out and you just don't know how awkward you are. What advice would you have for them and sort of getting over that, sitting next to, the less than authentic boss or peers?
Yeah. So I love this question. And I want to honor the call out that you're making. And I think especially as it relates to, there's some research that I go into in the book, especially as it relates to women and women of color. Women and women of color are categorically research proven put under a higher level of scrutiny when it comes to the expectations of performance, where there seems to be a translation of, their version of confidence that almost needs to translate to others as some sort of flawlessness, right? Like mistakes should not be made. I think that the things I would say here are several fold. And so again, I honor what society has conditioned, especially for women and women of color. It is not black and white. It is not that easy, but a couple things. Awkwardness is not the same as ineptitude. So I talk about this early in the book, not feeling that gap between the two selves, not having an answer right away should not be confused or conflated with ineptitude. Ineptitude implies a lack of skill, right? Or failure in some way. So the example I give is, I wouldn't want to hire an inept anesthesiologist, but I'd be perfectly fine hiring an awkward one, right? So this is not about ineptitude or lack of skills. Awkwardness is also not about forcing deep vulnerability right out of the gate. I think of awkwardness as a stepping stone to vulnerability. It's a little lower on the emotional exposure scale. Now, that said, when you're in a room of people that have not yet let their own guards down, there's not, a shred of authenticity to be seen. The awkwardness is not something that they embrace. I do share a number of actionable strategies in the book, but my favorite, honestly, is to find your own voice as it relates to strategically placed humor. So I'll give you one of my favorite examples. One of my favorite examples comes from the work of Naomi Bagdonis and Jennifer Acker in their book, Humor Seriously. So these are two Stanford professors that run a course called Humor in Business at Stanford. It is the same credit as financial accounting, right? This is the class that they teach. And one of my favorite stories from their book was there was a woman, she was a Silicon Valley executive, very well respected, very high up. She would be in these board meetings at this tech company. And she came to find out that after these meetings that were predominantly men, that after the meeting, the men would continue the conversation in the men's room. And she would miss out on really important, data points, or like they were having business conversation in there. And so she was put in a position of, okay, what do I do with this? This was a pretty, vanilla group of communicators. And so what she did to sort of lean on her ability to have this awkward conversation, but also do it in a way that didn't shine their eyes directly into the sun was next time this happened, she said, at the end of the meeting, gentlemen, if you continue this conversation when you're in the men's room today, I just know that I'm going to come right in there after you, right? Or I'm going to come right in. So it was a way to use gentle humor to have an awkward conversation about something that needed to be said, right? An important conversation. So I think there are ways, again, that have to be authentic to your voice, finding strategies to even folks that don't necessarily let that part of their guard down, ways to engage them and bring your whole self into it in smaller stakes. But it's always important to kind of test the environment too.
Well, I love that example. I also think for people that don't think they're very funny, sort of making fun of or exposing, I call it a humility moment, but exposing an awkward, like the fast pass to becoming funny, especially in the workplace because the bar is so low, right?
Yeah.
That's the good news.
What I like in the research is that, when we talk about humor in business, especially humor as an awkwardness embracing tool, it's not about cracking jokes. It's about finding the levity in those everyday moments, right? So she didn't come up with a knock, knock, who's there? It was just, okay, guys, meeting's over. But if there's more going on in the bathroom, I'm coming in too, right? It was just an honest moment that honestly made her appear more confident, more relatable, even though it was just the sort of declaration of what was an awkward emotion and an awkward feeling. It actually put her in better graces. She came across more confident because of it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And let them decide their level of how serious she was. And that, right? Like, it was I'd walk away from that if I was a man. I was like, was that a joke or did I just get completely like put in my place? And it's probably somewhere along in the continuum. Yeah.
Right.
I love that.
Nicole, what are you doing over there? I'm finally getting up off the virtual couch and making some career moves, just like you told me. And I came across your authenticity playbook.
Yeah.
I forgot to tell you about it. This authenticity playbook I've had for a long time, and it's actually the most downloaded resource I have. It's basically 10 quote unquote plays, authenticity plays that you can make at work to stand out and get promoted and use authenticity as your strategy, your secret weapon. Now, I'm really going to take this to heart because despite all the sports references, I know that it's full of your awesome and your authenticity. And it probably is going to help me go far or go home or go big or whatever the sports reference is. All the things. So listeners, if you also want the authenticity playbook, you can go to beauthenticinc.com/playbook and you can make career moves like Nicole. Whoop, whoop, Heisman!
So let's talk about the book. And I want to talk about your second TEDx and I mean, just the incredible success you're having. The first is how, now that you've transitioned out of your sort of quote unquote corporate world, I know for me, I realized I had so much success with my authenticity, but then as I transitioned to my new role, sometimes I was like, forgot about that, right? Not that I wasn't acting different, but you sort of forget about that bag of tricks, which is obviously ironic. How has this helped you? I mean, you're coming out with your second TEDx within what, like 5 months of each other, and obviously your business is growing. How has sort of what you preach helped you as you build out your new business?
Yeah, every day. I mean, I'll say that, kind of what we talked about before, which is you look to models in the business that are doing things that seem along the lines of what you want to do. And I think having role models and having people to look up to, mentors, is important. And early on, what I gave myself permission to do, and I use this expression a lot, was place small bets. Place small bets, right? I didn't know what this new version of me was going to look or feel like. And so part of me needed to figure that out again. Same to you. I kind of knew what corporate K-Force version of Henna looked like. I knew I wanted to maintain what was working there, but I didn't know how it was going to look here. So I feel like I did, to a degree, try on a few different personas. Like my first website was this, I made it myself. It was this very navy blue and gray and maroon, like very corporate, very block letters, because that's what I thought corporate needed and wanted. So it's not to say that I came out guns blazing authentic. Like I knew who I was, but I did forget a few times along the way because I tried to cater to what I thought other people needed or wanted. But here's the thing about, I think, both authenticity, about embracing your awkwardness is, it's never a finished game, right? It's never a finished game. So I was constantly like course correcting. This doesn't really feel right. I don't know that I love this. I don't know that this is what I'm even good at, right? And it was constant adjustments. And I think the most awkward thing of all is when you try something as an entrepreneur and it doesn't work, and then you have to sort of declare that it doesn't work, right? So I'd come up with some programs early on that I launched, and I'll tell you what, they weren't that great. Like a couple people bought them, and I mentally was preparing myself for this big, like, well, we're, sunsetting this program. Guess what? Nobody was paying that close attention. Like the only people that were paying attention were the ones who were interested in the previous program. For everyone else, they don't know about all my million failed attempts. They only know about the things that are working, the TEDx's, the book, like that's all they know about. And so what I learned early was part of iteration, every inflection point I'm getting to with this stage of my career is an invitation for awkwardness. And it's how I handle it that's going to determine if I get through it or if I get stuck in it. If I want to sit there and have a, gosh, this is embarrassing. I put all this time in this program. Nobody wants it. That's energy that I'm spending that I could be spending on the next thing that actually will work. And so it's daily work, though. It's daily mindset work about this comes with the territory. Embrace it. You're going to put your foot in your mouth. You're not going to know what you're doing. And that is literally me every day. But I've really come to appreciate it as part of the game I'm trying to play.
Yeah. And like you said, it's just the speed at which you sort of get through that gap, if you will, which I completely agree with. Second TED Talk. So I've seen the first, which can you tell our listeners the name? I know it's something about awkward near secret weapon.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. And then your second, and why the second? What else did you have to share?
Yeah. So the first is why awkwardness is your secret weapon for risk taking at work. So that one I did in September. It came out in, I think, December or January. The second one just came out yesterday. So this is great timing.
Congratulations.
I'm actually super excited. Thank you. That one I did in December. So it took a little longer to get posted, but it's because TED wanted to promote it a little bit. So it was, it just posted yesterday by itself. So it got a little bit of extra attention and it's got tons of views already. So I'm very pleased about that. So the second one was, related, tangential to this idea of awkwardness, part of what I find fascinating is, what do people find really awkward? What are some of the behaviors, some of the things that we need to do, we want to do, but we find very awkward? And one of those things I really kept thinking about, especially with my work with women's leadership groups, was this idea of bragging. So the second talk, I actually gave it a different title. They retitled it, but it's on the TEDx site. It's called, "Is There Such a Thing as Good Bragging?" And so the question I set out to answer is, in this hybrid remote world that we all work in now, we need to share our wins in order to be seen as competent at work. But how do we do that when the world tells us bragging is bad? And people find win sharing, self-promotion, bragging incredibly awkward. And, I'm here to tell you there's a good way to do it. So that's what the second TEDx is about.
Oh, I cannot wait to watch it. I of course, completely relate. I often work with leaders and companies around something called their intriguing intro. And what I always say is, and it has 3 components. It has a humility moment, it has a big brag, and then it has what's in it for them. And
I love that.
I always say, sort of the humility moment or your awkwardness is like the cheese or peanut butter you'd put around that pill that you'd give to a dog.
Yep.
And it just makes that bragging so much more powerful. So I can't wait to geek out over that. And congratulations. That's amazing. And you have a book coming out, Good Awkward.
I do. Yeah.
Awkward comes out. It's how to embrace the embarrassing and celebrate the cringe. I love that. To become the bravest you in September.
Yes.
So tell us more about what's in the book and why you wanted to write, 200 some pages about awkwardness.
I'm so proud of this book because I'll tell you what, and this is, again, let's just keep it awkward and open. The truth is that I almost didn't write this book because I've wanted to write a book since the 5th grade. I did not want to write a book just to say that I did, right? No offense to anyone else who does it this way, but I was like, I don't want something just, I'm a speaker. I said I wrote a book, so here's a book, right? If I did this, I wanted it to really be something that changed the narrative and that was very different. I almost didn't because, like everyone else who feels awkward or feels like there's a spotlight that could be on them in a less than flattering light, I thought, gosh, there's already been so many books about personal development, about getting comfortable being uncomfortable, about not caring about people's approval, about not giving an F, right? Like, we've got every version of that book. I said, what do you have to say that's different? And so I remember when the pandemic was starting to improve over and over, Queen Brene Brown kept saying, stay awkward, brave, and kind. Stay awkward, brave, and kind. That was her phrase that she kept using as it related to finding our footing again, when the pandemic was starting to settle. And I kept hearing that and going, I really want to stay awkward. The brave and kind part, that will follow, or like the kind part's easy. The brave part's a little harder. The staying awkward part feels really hard for me, right? What is about that? Tell me more about the stay awkward part. So I started to get, again, deep dive into that word. And what I found was there's so many people who have big dreams who are paralyzed by awkwardness. The awkwardness keeps them frozen where they are. So there's a little, let's laugh about it. Let's make fun of each other, cringe. Those moments, some of them are big, some of them are small. We can throw them away. But there are so many others where that fear of awkwardness, the discomfort that it brings, will keep people stuck exactly where they are. And that's once I sort of started to see that pattern play out in people that I saw and people that I coached and I worked with, I thought, this deserves its own special attention. So I'm just really proud of the fact that this is not your get comfortable being uncomfortable book. This is a really fresh take on an emotion that is universal. My opening story is about Jennifer Lawrence and the fact that she is beloved by so many because despite being gorgeous and a great kisser and winning every Oscar and making more money than God, right? Despite all that, she trips over herself at the Oscars and says, gosh, you guys are only clapping because that was really embarrassing, right? And she's snorting flared nostrils while on an Abercrombie photo shoot. And it's that makes her feel so accessible to us. So how do we all channel more of that in our professional growth? And so that was where I really wanted to write the book that taught us how to do that.
I love it. It's almost like, the big A versus the little a, the big A awkward. And you know, you're right. We can laugh about the little and how it can supercharge you, but there's some big things that paralyze really, really good people. Yeah. What's, so you told us about the first story, just one more question on the book and then, we'll tell people where to find you. Yeah. What was your favorite, other story from that book? What was another?
Oh gosh.
Story?
I have a lot of favorites. One of my favorite conversations I'll say was I do some work with Chief, which is a women's leadership organization. And I had the opportunity to interview Lindsay Kaplan, who's one of the co-founders, and she's also this just chief brand officer. And we just had a really fascinating conversation about awkwardness specific to women. Now, this is a book for men and women and anybody who identifies in any other way. This is not just for women, but we really had this interesting deep dive into the archetypes of the successful business person who is awkward. And we realized there's so many men, right? There's like the nerdy tech C-suite person. There's the creative guy with tattoos, right? There's all these like personas of the successful awkward male that are celebrated in business. And then we really tried to think like, who is the successful awkward female? And the only ones we could think of were people who actually play that role as a persona, the Tina Fey, the Mindy Kaling, the Aubrey Plaza, the Kristen Stewart. And what's fascinating to me is that these women are extremely hardworking and extremely smart and extremely accomplished. And yet women in leadership in business are not yet afforded the same opportunity to lean into that as a part of their, persona, the same way that men in business do. So I think one of my favorite conversations was the way Lindsay Kaplan, has used awkwardness as her superpower as a leader of a fast-growing $1 billion valuation company and how many advantages it's given her. Because I just think it is so empowering to hear a woman starting to carve that path that men have started to create and just show us what's possible. So I'm just like, yes, carve the path, lead the way so we can be that archetype too in business. So it's a really fun story from her.
Oh, it's going to be a great book too. I mean, I love the way you write. You draw me in. You've got, the authenticity, the sass, the humor, but the intelligence. And so I am really excited for you. I will be pre-ordering that right away. And so hopefully our listeners will too. Where can people best connect with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is my preferred playground. So, I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn is Henna Pryor. So at Henna Pryor on both, but LinkedIn is, I think, where I prefer to play. And hennapryor.com is my website. And if you have any curiosities about the book, it's just goodawkward.com. That'll take you to the book landing page. There are some bonuses for people who pre-order. I can send the intro chapter right away. But I'm really excited. I'd love to make friends. And to me, this is more than a book or more than a TEDx talk. This is a movement. I think much like you, Erin, I am desperately hopeful that we can galvanize a group of women that can step into their full selves. I galvanize a group of, men, women, children, that galvanize their full selves. So, more than book sales, more than TEDx views, I hope that, people like you and I can just have this conversation around it is not only okay, but it is absolutely necessary that we bring every part of this to the world. So I hope that people do.
I love it. We need you so much. I think you're such a light. I was beyond excited to finally meet you and do this interview. You are, the quintessential because work doesn't have to suck guest. So
work doesn't have to suck.
It doesn't. It doesn't. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Erin. It was fun.
Friends, do you have other friends? Are they adults? Are they out in the world somewhere? Please, please, please invite them to listen to our podcast.
Okay, dude, you sound like a late night, 2 a.m. infomercial. Basically what she's saying is our love language is ratings, reviews, and sharing the podcast. We'd love nothing more. And if you would do that.